Welcome to the AI Security Update, hosted by Dr. Anmol Agarwal, where we break down the latest in AI and security with experts on the front lines, focused on what you need to know without the hype. Welcome to the AI Security Update, where we discuss the latest in AI and security. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest for this episode, Michala. Michala, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Anmol. It's great to be here.
So I'm really excited that my friend Michala is joining us. Michala has a consulting business based in the UK, Cybility Consulting. But Michala, why don't you introduce yourself for our audience?
Hi, Anmol. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to join you on your podcast here. As you said, my name is Michala Liavaag, and my background stems right from classical music degree through to retail and 25 odd years in IT, hands-on, and moving into leading information governance and security programs across in the UK, so NHS, local government, charity sector, and that's prior to then moving into consultancy.
So such a diverse and varied background, really impressive, the pivot from classical music to the nonprofit sector and then now to your consulting business. So Michala, one of my questions that I always ask people is, based on your experience, what are the challenges in AI and security? But I think in your case also, just what are the challenges you see in general in music, in the nonprofit sector, based on the sectors you've been involved in as well?
Okay, that's a few questions rolled into one there. So I think if we think about the non-profit sector, certainly in the UK, and if we split that for a moment and think about the charities specifically, I'd say ever since COVID, there has been a real challenge around the income side in terms of generating funding. Obviously it's been a very difficult time for everybody, but one of the challenges we've seen is what I describe as the infrastructure charities. So those that provide services to other charities effectively. They have really struggled, and quite a lot of them have unfortunately had to disband. So that's a sort of general challenge around charities. Interestingly, just last week, I am one of the co-chairs for a new charity IT leaders cybersecurity special interest group, because there's that recognition that yes, charities need cybersecurity too. But don't have the nice budgets that some of the private sector do, yet carrying some of the most sensitive information that's out there. Think about how many healthcare charities or like Samaritans or anybody dealing with like mental health challenges. So very sensitive information, challenges around recruitment, with the salaries, etc. So many different challenges, and some of these echo across other industries, of course. But that's really kind of where I see most of them at the moment.
Yeah, a really interesting perspective about the charity, basically lack of resources. And I've seen this in my work as well, right? These smaller groups, the smaller businesses or smaller government agencies in the US, they typically didn't have the resources for the really amazing, everything included security package, but then still having to also practice basic security principles and like protecting sensitive information. But it gets so difficult when people are not aware of the different risks involved, or they don't have the time or resources to actually enforce these protections.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenges, I think for most organizations really, it is that constant churn of staff as well. So you maybe have this wonderful awareness program educating people about what to do. You start to build this, sort of risk aware cyber security culture. And then, people move out, things change, and it's like being back to the drawing board again. So I certainly see that as another challenge for certainly the smaller organisations, the less mature in terms of their, joiners, movers, leavers processes, for example.
Yeah, great point. So Michaela, another challenge that I see is that we have a lot of people like yourself. They're trying to now enter AI cybersecurity careers,
Mm.
and it's becoming much more challenging because of AI. And we're seeing that people are scared to try to get a job in cybersecurity or in AI security because they're thinking AI can already do those entry level jobs for them. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a conflicting one. In my own head, really, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with AI, I'd say. If we, for a moment, set aside the AI and just think about cybersecurity industry in terms of recruitment, sort of 5, 8 years ago, we had this huge sort of shortage, and there was certainly in the UK several initiatives to try and plug, sort of build that pipeline of talent coming through. That has been effective. But what we're finding now is you've got this gap between basically organizations. They need cybersecurity people, but they need people who already come with lots of experience. The people they do have either don't have time to sort of handhold, people who are new into the field and sort of bring them up to standard. Just think about like traditional apprenticeships. Once upon a time, that's how people learned on the job. That's not as common now as it used to be. I'd like to see more of that actually. But absolutely, for those people who are now, let's just say, they've gone to uni or they're just looking at the job market now, the entry level jobs um, are, for lots of companies, being automated by AI. So on the one hand, there's the argument that, well, the kind of mundane things are being automated by AI, which frees people up to do more interesting, more valuable work. However, if you're somebody who's coming new into the field, how do you then get that experience in order to be able to do that more interesting thing? So, and I have to say, I don't think this is just the case in cybersecurity or AI either. I think this is the case for lots of professions as to, how are people going to sort of make that jump, or will they even need to, you know?
Yeah, do they even need to? That's
Mm,
another consideration because um, I see a lot of people are focusing on AI
mm,
as the career to pursue. So let's say someone is laid off, then they say, okay, let me learn AI. Basically, when I take an Uber or Lyft and then my
mm,
Uber driver is saying, oh, maybe I should go into AI.
mm.
So it's been a regular occurrence now, but I think you make a good point. Is it even needed? And so how would someone think about whether they should pursue cybersecurity or AI careers or maybe stay where they are or do something else?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a difficult question. Yeah, we're all individuals at the end of the day. What I would say is anyone who loves learning, loves challenging themselves, um, would be somebody who could be a good candidate for this field. If you don't, then I'd probably say stay away because everything changes so quickly. And as I said, I've been in the IT side for over 25 years now, and I have never seen change like we are seeing in these times now. It is absolutely crazy. So, yeah, loving learning and not minding, staying up to date and keeping up to date are definitely criteria for an individual who wants to go into this. If they're thinking they're going to go into it just for a pay packet, they're probably going to get a bit of a rude awakening, I think. In terms of, and just to comment on what you said about Uber, by the way, the Uber driver might well go into AI because, of course, you've got self-driving cars, which is increasingly becoming okay with different governments sort of authorizing things. So, yeah, it's. I think this might be a little bit far forward, but my thinking is that it won't be too long before everyone just needs universal basic income. And a lot of the roles that we're doing now won't be needed in the same way that they were. I think for the creatives, I think there's going to be more opportunity on that side.
Challenging. It is very challenging. I agree with you because I think we're all different people and we all like different things. But I agree that in this field, whether you're in AI, cybersecurity, I would say any STEM field in general, like even science, biomedical engineering, etc. The technology and everything is moving so quickly that it seems like we go to sleep, and then my colleagues in Europe or the UK, when I wake up, they have this new update that I didn't even know before I went to sleep. So that's been happening almost every single day. It's like I go to sleep and then I wake up and it's like, oh wow, 10 new papers or 20 new papers is what happened in the last, 8 hours. So we definitely do see that in this field.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And of course, we then need to use AI to summarize all those papers to try and keep up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a colleague that I was working with. He recommended using Notebook LM
Uh-huh.
from Google, Notebook LM from Google to summarize these research papers. But I know there are other tools out there, but it was really cool. And by the way, this is not like a sponsored podcast or anything, but just based on my experience, Notebook LM can take like 10, 20 different papers and then summarize all of those papers for you in one consistent document or podcast or video. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I have to say I am a user of Notebook LM, primarily for industry reports. The 100 pages. It's much easier to give it to that and listen to a quick podcast, but still be able to interrogate the original source material, which I think is really important.
Yeah, because if you use the tools like Notebook LM, you'll notice that they always use the same phrases. They tend to use the same phrases and they might make things up. So for example, I was using Notebook LM for summarizing the different speeches that I've given to try to create a comprehensive speaker reel or speaker summary. And it was hallucinating things that I never said, like random things about brain chips or AI used in the brain, like Neuralink, which I've never spoken about. So AI is really good at summarizing, but also it can make things up, hallucinate. So that's why it's really good, as Michala is saying, to interrogate the source material, also look at the sources, verify everything when you get something from the AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just having that same conversation with a client today about one of the reasons that I like to use Perplexity, um, precisely because it doesn't hallucinate as much as any of the others in my experience. But again, not sponsored.
Yeah, just based on personal experience, and all these opinions are just our own.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't tried Perplexity for that, so maybe I'll try Perplexity. I know a lot of people are fans of Claude now
Mhm.
because they have this idea of responsible AI.
Mhm.
So I tried it, and they always say, "Is this responsible for me to give you this information?"
Mm.
And then other tools might not have that guardrail in place. So it's very interesting if you give one prompt to different AI tools and see what those different AI tools give you, like Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, of course,
Mm.
Copilot, and then see, what do they tell you? And probably they'll all tell you a different answer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the reason actually why I use Perplexity is because I'm on a license where I can point it at the different models. So, each model has its strengths and weaknesses. And so what I tend to do is, if I'm doing something creative, I might point it at, say, Gemini. If I'm doing something around, I don't know, long documents, I might, as you say, point it at Claude. So that's one of the reasons that I like that particular tool.
Yeah, I definitely need to try that tool. Another tool I tried is duck.ai. So it's an AI engine from duckduckgo.com.
Mhm.
So they basically say that they allow you to use the AI models, but you don't need to log in and it's completely private. Now it is restricted in its functionality, but it does give me access to some of the AI models if I want to do a search and I want some level of privacy with that, where
Mhm.
I don't want to log in.
Yeah, that's a good tip there. Yeah, I've not used that one.
Yeah, so there are all of these different tools out there for you to try. And there are new tools coming out every single day. So who knows what will come out in 6 months from now, for example.
Well, if you just think about where we were 6 months ago, I can't even imagine where we'll be 6 months from now.
So, Michaela, what's a current event that comes to mind related to AI and security that you think our audience should know about?
Um, so it's probably more security than AI, but here in the UK, the government have been very keen on pushing the AI agenda, both from the last government actually, and we've now got a Labour government. Um, and with that, there's also been conversations around having a sort of national ID scheme in a similar way that some of the Europeans do. Um, and that's something that is a little bit scary in terms of, bringing all these different sources together and having a single ID for everything. Um, and just to give you an example, as a business owner, I have to maintain a registration on Companies House website. Companies House is responsible for effectively enforcing some of the rules around the Companies Act, and so excuse me, and they have recently changed the rules around how you basically identify yourself and what information you need to give them for the purposes of verification. And there's been this big push. You had a deadline to get in. And what's happened, unfortunately, and I can drop you the link, is that there was a problem with their website, which meant that people could log in and view other people's details, change other people's details, which you absolutely should not be able to do for a government site like that. So as a company director, we have to maintain certain records on there, things like the accounts for the company, various filings every year, and also information about us as directors. So some of that information is available publicly on the Companies House register, but some of it is kept private. And what's happened with this particular incident is that people who were logged in were able to view and edit other companies' data. And I shouldn't be able to, let's say, go into Tesco's directors and change their details for mine and add myself as a director, for example. So given that it is a government registry, it's the sort of thing where you would expect those sorts of things to be picked up. But I think that's one of the areas that, AI can absolutely help with. We've seen some really great progress recently with Claude Code and reverse engineering some older software and through that identifying vulnerabilities that hadn't been identified before. There was I can't remember the title of the post now, but the sysinternals guy, is it Mark Rusovich? He posted about it recently, so that's one that's worth looking at. But I think AI can really help with vulnerabilities, with coding securely, but of course that necessitates that it's trained on a secure code base already.
Thank you so much, Michala, for highlighting the UK perspective on this. I think that's also very useful. So my thoughts on this, right? Can AI help us with security, or will it be adding to the security issues? It's depends on how you use it, which is kind of, a subjective answer. But I had Philip Wiley on my show. I just talked to him today, and probably the episode will release a week before this one. But he was talking about how when you use AI for pen testing, that people are now thinking about just using the AI tool to pen test systems instead of actually doing the pen test themselves. And while that can be very helpful, it can also cause them to inadvertently bring the company down or cause outages that weren't supposed to happen, because AI, it's a tool, but it can make mistakes. So it's really important to have human oversight.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Again, whilst I agree with it, I can also see that many companies will be like, oh, we can get an automated AI test for this much versus, a human one, or at least a human assisted one, for this much. And unfortunately, money often wins out. So that's probably one of my concerns actually on that side. Um, I think AI in general, no matter what subject it is, works best when used by an expert in the field. So, something that they know about. So if I was, for example, to try and use AI from an adversarial point of view, I wouldn't be able to say that's absolute rubbish, it's talking crap, or absolutely that's absolutely right, whereas you would. So I think being aware of our own sort of limits of knowledge and how to think critically about the information we're getting, it is important. But there's some wonderful, wonderful advances with AI. But at the same time, as you say, it depends on what you're using it for. On the one hand, you've got attackers who are also using AI very effectively. I think you have this huge gap between the average person at home who still kind of is just sort of tootling around their computer, that they're comfortable doing what they know, but they don't need anything else. And then, the visionaries who are, going for AGI in a big way. And this gap I find quite concerning because it feels like we're already through IT disenfranchising people. And now with AI on top of that, I just feel like the gap is getting wider. So, for example, just thinking about some friends that when you say to them about deep fakes and voice cloning and these things now being techniques that are used in scams, and so they need to be aware and mindful of those types of attacks, not just your standard phishing, for example. And also when you show them, and it's so hard to tell in videos, what's real, what isn't. I think those are very much the kind of real world impacts and threats that need to be thought about, and some systems brought in to help the everyday person. Really, I think that's where we're, missing out, I feel like.
Can you talk a little bit more about this divide that you see? Because I, I think at least the audience for this show, right? We will have some people, they're just starting to use AI. They're just the everyday person, AI hobbyist or AI enthusiast, if you will. And then you have the AI academics, researchers that think we are close to this general intelligence. So can you explain both sides of the divide a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, so on the one hand, if you think about it's now 2026, and 100 years ago, you know, TV wasn't really a thing. And if you just sort of think about how quickly technology has moved on in that time, and how quickly we as human beings have to adjust to each of those changes, um, effectively what we have now, I feel, is this circumstance where, let's say, take parents, my dad's in his 80s, and literally it's having gone from not using anything IT at all to suddenly you're expected to use it for everything. Even everything online, actually. And I'll just give you a very personal example. I was trying to cancel a membership subscription from a cinema that will remain nameless. And they said to go to this link to do so. I go to that link, takes me to another one, but then was completely dead. Then I found another link, and again, I just went round the houses, found a phone number. The phone number sent me back to the first link that was dead. And I was just like, how, if I'm somebody who can handle these sorts of systems, how is anyone who's just comfortable sort of, getting used to left clicking and right clicking on a mouse, for example, supposed to deal with this stuff? So I feel like governments, by going digital first and not providing other methods for people to, basically carry out everyday functions, is doing harm, I feel like, to some people. In terms of the people at the other end, so I feel like I'm like in the middle here somewhere. It's like I'm happy using AI to a point, but love-hate relationship with it, but not, like you, a researcher, in the weeds of it.
Yeah, great point. So, Michaela, I just wanted to first elaborate on what you're saying because I think what you make is a really great point, right? Everything's online now. And even I have some relatives, they're not in their 80s yet, but they're still struggling with how do I use this system? Because they're not in IT. They're just saying, they know the basic email, Microsoft applications. And then now when we travel, for example, I was traveling with family and everything is online now. So when you enter the EU and you're a US citizen, you enter the EU, they want to do it online. When you get a visa, it's online. When you go to security, they take your picture and it's online. And then you might not understand, okay, what happens when I get my picture taken?
Mm.
What happens with that image? And they're using AI to actually detect, like, oh, this is a face. But then there could be privacy implications with that as well. Now, Michala, let's talk about if you have any opinion about the facial recognition at the airports, because now I'm noticing whenever I travel, they always just ask to take my picture. When I'm going internationally, they take my picture. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I remember the very first time that it was when I went through the US, and it wasn't so much the picture taking as the taking my fingerprints. I was just like, what the hell? You know, why do you need my
Yes,
fingerprint?
that happened to me in Germany, and I was thinking, why do they need my fingerprints?
Yeah, because in my mind, I have the association, I'm sure as many Brits do, that fingerprints equals crime. You've been arrested for a crime or suspected of crime, and that's the reason they're then taking them. So that was really the sort of big moment for me when I thought, oh, I don't like this. But recently, as you mentioned, traveling in Europe, um, uh, there's this new, God, I've forgotten what it's called now. Is it Esther? Can't remember. Anyway, new scheme, which means that in theory, it should be easier to travel back and forth across Europe. But it necessitates having your photo taken, your full fingerprints taken, and then obviously, yeah, your passport and everything details as well. And I did feel that felt a bit intrusive in terms of the way it was done. And actually, the person in front of me in a queue, they were disabled and in a wheelchair. And so they had the I guess the area wasn't really sort of set up for them. They did manage to make it work, but it was just another example of a different type of disenfranchisement for me, in that example. But yeah, that's the one that made me feel really uncomfortable, the fingerprints thing, more than the facial recognition. Um, but that said, just thinking, going back to like current events, there's one in the UK recently. There's been quite a bit of back and forth, I think it's fair to say, about the use of facial recognition by police in the UK. And increasingly, forces have been wanting to use it, but literally just, what, a week ago now, one of the police forces, Essex, have been forced to pause their facial recognition camera use, um, for the unshocking reason that a study found racial bias. Shock horror. And so, you know, it's like the sort of thing that a data protection impact assessment would pick up right at the very start of this sort of project. The use of AI, we know, whatever it is trained on certain material, and there is going to be bias in that content. So for me, that's yet another challenging area around this.
So there is bias in data because ultimately all data is biased.
Mm.
And we as people are also biased. The way we see the world, the way we go about our daily interactions are all different, right? I'm in the US, Michala in the UK.
Mm.
So again, very different perspectives. But we might train the data based on our local viewpoints. Like I might focus on US stories, Michala might talk about UK current events. But then what happens when we deploy our model to South America or just somewhere completely different, right? The model won't be able to most likely accurately predict this is the condition in South America because it's been trained on UK and US data, for example. So that's one thing. And then how do we actually make sure our data set is diverse? But then there are always edge cases. Like Michala, you mentioned the facial recognition and the fingerprints, and the person was in a wheelchair in front of you. But they didn't account for that when they design their system or they design their model about what happens when someone's in a wheelchair. So same idea. It's when you're developing this AI model, accounting for all the different diverse data sets that you could have and accounting for the edge cases. But then, Michala, do you think that we could ever truly have an automated system, or do you think we still need humans to be there for those edge cases when they arise?
My gut feeling says humans still need to be involved, so human in the loop, especially for edge cases, because you can't train everything. Um, whether or not, um, just reflecting back on fundamentally, AI is about pattern recognition, and even those edge cases are still in a form of pattern. So what I'm just wondering is whether they would be able to infer action, appropriate action, or not. I don't know. I feel uncomfortable with the idea of, let's say, an autonomous robot um, making decisions on an edge case of its own back without any human in the loop sort of validating. Not just any human, of course, but somebody who's got expertise in the whatever the thing is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way, but then we never know what could happen in the future and how technology might morph. So, one of my friends, Nathan Chung, he was telling me he went to this expo in Las Vegas, the CES Consumer
Mm-hmm.
Electronics Show, and they were demonstrating all these different robots like AI powered dogs, AI powered refrigerators, etc. And one of the robots that I saw that was demonstrated at this show, I just looked it up, and they are envisioning having a robot that can carry a person upstairs across large distances, and it's basically like carrying you on its back. And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting robot. Like that would help with accessibility. It would help people with low mobility or people who want to travel large distances and they can't. But then what about the safety, or did they account for certain kinds of people or certain heights, weights? I think from my understanding, it's only being deployed in Japan for now, and then maybe they'll expand it later on.
Mm. I think I know the one that you're talking about. And yes, I mean, if you immediately think of the profile of Japanese population versus, say, the US population, we'll
Yeah.
definitely need some different parameters there.
Yeah, definitely. Just thinking about the different people in the US versus Japan and the different heights, etc. So, um, really interesting idea, but then how would you scale it to a global context, and how would they actually train the robot on different kinds of people and different medical conditions? I'm just thinking, out loud. Some people have different medical conditions, like strokes, paralysis. How would they use that robot? Is that a consideration that these developers have made? That's something, if it ever happens, if they ever deploy globally, it would be interesting to see how they train the robot and how it can be used for different scenarios.
Yes. So, m- again, I did say I have a love-hate relationship with AI, right? Um, I actually think that it's going to be the AI training itself for the global population. Um, I think as humans that we are limited in many ways. And I think as long as the people with the money are able to keep the power going, then I think it will be AI deciding whether or not to train for those edge cases, or whether it will decide actually, perhaps it views us as less valuable. Um, I don't know. It's I can be pessimistic as well as optimistic.
Yeah, we see both sides of the story, right? Optimistic, it can help people,
Mm.
but then also pessimistic of the evil AI that we always see in the TV shows and movies. Or even if we want to discuss philosophy, right? The trolley problem. The
Oh,
classic trolley problem is like, when an AI has to make a decision,
mm.
will it save
Oh,
5 people by killing one person,
mm.
or will it just not save that one person? Um, so I'm not a philosophy major, but I believe that's kind of what the trolley problem is stating. So then how would AI make that decision is when it has to save one person, would it save one person or would it go for the greater good? And how could it determine that?
Yeah.
And that's like a ethical question as well.
All I can say is that my gut feeling is that it would look at greater good, um, purely from I guess, a mathematical perspective. It would churn through various algorithms, coming out with, different probabilities of something happening, and determine that more is more valuable in that sense. And therefore, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's happening now just in medical, let's say in the UK health system, um, that many medications are not made available to people purely because of the cost, and the cost, that money can be used to help other people with conditions that don't cost as much. So those sorts of things are happening already. And I think that will just get baked into the training for whatever AI, comes next.
Yeah, interesting point. I think that's something the people involved in AI ethics would be able to give us a good answer. And I think everyone is looking at this differently, because it's easy to have an idealistic view of everything should be okay. But then how does this actually work in the real world is something we're still thinking about.
Yeah, the optimist in me pictures, Star Trek, where, yeah, all basic needs are met, and, you sort of do what you want to do, um, what makes you, well, effectively happy. That's not the word I'm looking for, but, um, and then the other side is, yeah, full on Terminator, and we need Sarah Connor pronto. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm hoping, the real world is not as grim or we'll find a healthy balance, I hope. So let's see. But Michala, you have a lot of experience with governance and with consulting.
Mhm.
So what are some reoccurring challenges or points that you've seen related to AI governance or just governance in general that you've seen with your clients or just in the industry in general?
Mm. Okay, so oh, um, I think first of all, AI governance um, struggles as to, well, for some organizations, trying to determine where it sits is a challenge. Um, in some organizations, it's seen as an extension of cybersecurity governance. In others, it's, seen as an extension from legal or data protection. So you've got quite a lot of data protection officers who are transitioning into AI governance, for example. Um, and there's no kind of right answer for it. What I would say is that the most effective organizations are the ones who recognize it is a cross-disciplinary field, and you do need those voices from all those different fields, just like with standard information governance, to be able to provide those perspectives for you on whatever the topic is related to AI. So you've got, one of the challenges is fundamentally understanding the organization and where they're at. So you have, just as we talked about, some people who are, just sort of managing the basics with IT, to the others. Exactly the same thing in any organization. You will have the early adopters who are trying everything and saying, oh, we could do this, we could do that, isn't it great? And then you've got the people who are scared to try it at all. And so your AI governance program needs to be able to accommodate all of those views. And from a cybersecurity point of view, you can't govern what you don't know is there. So it feels like it's sort of back to cybersecurity basics in terms of, well, what are our assets? So do we have people using shadow AI, as in ones we haven't formally approved for use? Do we have people playing with agents? Or I saw an email just yesterday about Perplexity encouraging the use of Perplexity Computer, which is their agentic side, with Slack. And so I immediately kind of think, oh my goodness, because I can just picture some clients having an individual who's going to be like, oh, that's cool, I'll do that, press the button. And because that's moving ahead before the AI governance is, often AI governance is trailing, just like the law, that can open up a whole world of, new challenges and data breaches and incidents around that. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. What have you got? Find out who your early adopters are, get them on board, and make sure your program is going to accommodate everyone. And I'm a huge fan of upskilling people. I really think, certainly in the UK, it's always been, got to have your English, got to have your maths. And I think nowadays you've got to have your digital skills, you've got to have AI skills, because that's where we are, that's where the world's going to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even here in the US, people are still saying the same thing that everyone should have computer science training or classrooms to learn about programming, AI, cybersecurity from a very young age.
Mm.
We were, at least in the US, we always got this education about say no to drugs because that was a big thing. Like say no to drugs, no stranger danger type education. So adding this idea of AI, using AI. Here's how you use AI. Here are some fun projects you can do. Here's how you secure AI.
Mhm.
Basic security awareness, I think, is very important for everyone to learn about. But Michala, how do you think we can bring this education globally? Because I think every culture is different, but I think the fundamental skills everyone needs to know is the same. And then that also brings the digital divide into play as
Yeah.
well.
I think it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge of, um, I can see that the charity sector is probably going to have a big role to play here. Certainly in terms of getting some education, across the world. Um, I think, actually just thinking about it, the UK government, they've put together a skills hub with lots of free training courses. And it starts with the assessment journey to see where you're at with your AI skills, and then recommends courses off the back of that. So yeah, there'll be an element, I think, of each country's government um, taking a bit of a stance and lead on that. I completely agree with what you said about getting in really early from when you're a very young child, because yeah, that's when you can learn things really quickly, really easily, and then it just becomes part of your normal life. You don't know any different. So I think it's quite important there. But if you think about how some areas in the world still don't have good education, it's not necessarily a basic right for everybody. And then you put AI on top of that, I don't quite know how that's going to be solved, honestly.
Yeah, it's challenging because you see some countries, in villages, they don't have access to reliable internet or a computer in some cases. And then if we live in an AI driven world where we see so much fake news and that's fueling misinformation and disinformation, how do they get aware that this is happening? And
Mm.
how do they actually get the skills to verify what is actually happening? And I think then it ultimately is educating communities and having people there to support each other and using some level of intuition or your own analysis to say, does this make sense? Is this real?
Mm.
Because political elections, for example, you see so many deep fakes out there now. And then you have to use your analysis to say, is this real or is this just trying to manipulate opinions of
Mm.
the public? But yeah, I can't think of a good solution. I think a lot of it is just ensuring that people have support systems around them, and that would be charity or volunteer efforts as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge reliance and huge necessity for that. Um, and actually, if I could just give a shout out to the cyber helpline in the UK. They are a group of cybersecurity professionals who give up their own time to help victims of cybercrime. And there's an article recently, they published some of their own statistics, and the AI enabled fraud is right up and affecting people. The deep fakes, yeah. So yeah, I think charities will pick up where governments
Yeah, I think we have so many people volunteering their time and just sharing their knowledge openly. Um, we are examples, right? We openly share our knowledge
Mhm.
on LinkedIn or just share some basic cybersecurity tips for everyone. And I think a lot of people are doing that. But then the challenge becomes the people who don't have access to
Yeah.
the computer or to LinkedIn, right? Then how can we help them? That's, I think, a big challenge. And I don't have a good answer. I think that's something even policymakers are debating right now.
Yeah, yeah. All I'm going to say is that I agree with you. It's a very thorny problem to try and address, both to understand in the first place and to address. Yeah.
So, Michaela, another question I think that comes up, right? So you mentioned this idea of universal basic income.
Mm.
So, can you elaborate a little bit more on your thoughts behind this? Because I think I've heard various perspectives from guests. So, some people say um, tax certain AI features or provide a flat tax. Some people say, it's inevitable, we just need to adapt. And I think what you're proposing is something that's unique that no other guest has talked about.
Okay. So, what I mean by universal basic income is a certain amount of money that is given to everyone in a population to cover their basic needs. So, food, shelter, warmth. And that then kind of, in my mind at least, it takes away eliminating, once again, that huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so it would be, again, in my head, the Star Trek sort of more equal society. Um, I believe that Finland was one of the first countries to do a trial of universal basic income. And I know that has extended to other countries, including the UK. There's an area doing its own trial. Um, Whether it would take off or not, given we're still in a very capitalist society, um, I don't know, but I do think that given that work is going to change so fundamentally with AI, if you just look at all the job layoffs and everything at the moment, I think providing a standard of living for everybody equally would be a positive thing, in my view. Um, that might be the very hopeful, optimistic person in me versus the negative one.
So I was just looking up and I remember Elon Musk, he actually has an idea. He says instead of universal basic income that he thinks in 20 years everyone will have a high paying job. So he called it, let me look. He's calling it universal high income. So he believes that with the rise of these technologies, work is optional and individuals will have access to goods and services without the need to work. And he's basically saying that with this, he believes that there will no longer be poverty in the future in 20 years. So it's very interesting to hear about Elon Musk's views because he's thinking in 20 years work is optional because AI and robotics will take over and we just have access to free goods and services.
Yeah, so I guess it's similar, um, but not quite I think the key thing there being about work being optional, that you don't have to work in order to live, to see your basic needs met. So from that perspective, I agree on that bit. In terms of no poverty in 20 years, the way things are progressing, I would love to see that much sooner. I think it's possible, but the power lies with people like Mr. Musk and others.
Yes, and I think it also depends on where you are in the world
Mm.
as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But that's interesting how Elon Musk has that view because he is one of the main people that is shaping the future of technology with his various companies. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Interesting
Yeah.
theory and all those things tied together.
Interesting. I'll just go with that. And what is a practical tip for an organization, whether it's a small business or a large company, in terms of how they apply AI governance?
Yeah, so if you haven't already got an AI governance group, I would say pull together the key people that you will need, both from legal, data protection, cybersecurity, health and safety, finance, procurement, all these different areas coming together because you need those different voices, and obviously HR, etc. as well, of course. And keep, find out who your early adopters are, who's really trying to run with it, and get them on side and involve them in, your decisions about how you're going to take policy forward, the strategy going forward, and look at upskilling all of your staff. AI is here to stay, so people need to be comfortable using it.
This concludes our show. We'll be back next time with more great conversations. Thank you for listening to the AI Security Update. No hype, just what you need to know. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes and connect with me, Dr. Anmol, on LinkedIn for more insights from the world of AI security. We'll see you next time.